This
working.
conference will now be recorded.
I've been working in healthcare industry for the past 8 years. So my work mainly revolves around developing HL7 interfaces between healthcare systems. It could be between hospital information systems and lab information systems, or between two different hospitals altogether, where it includes development of interfaces between PM and EHR or something of that sort. So I've been involved in all of interface development for the past 7.5 years, which included a lot of interface development as well as training many people at office and few people outside and few trainees from US as well. So that is a brief introduction about me. So in case if you have any questions, you can stop me and you can ask during the session. So basically, whenever I start any training, first two questions that I put across myself is why and how, because I firmly believe that those are the two questions which will answer whatever we want to learn going forward. So in every step through the training, I also want all the members to put up these questions to themselves in case if they have any doubts. Because two reasons for these two questions are why is to ensure why are we learning this particular thing and what is the basic requirement on how this particular thing has come up. For example, now we are talking about HL7. There is definitely a background reason why HL7 is in picture in today's world. So finding out that reason is very important before even learning about HL7. And second thing, how will let you know the entire technical concept running around this particular language HL7. So by putting up these two questions, you understand the reason or the business requirement behind the development of this one, and how will let you know the technical aspects of this entire thing. So these two questions has helped me in the past. I believe that will help most of them. So that is the best way to start with about any topic. So before even getting into HL7, there is something which we have to learn. So what is HL7? HL7 is nothing but a language which we use in the healthcare industry. We know that. But before even getting into healthcare industry, what is healthcare industry? So healthcare industry includes a lot of things. It includes hospitals, it includes insurances, it includes pharmacies, and there are many other things which will fall under the subset of this healthcare industry that we are talking about. So to start to know about HL7, there is something basic which we have to be aware of. So today's session we will go through that basic thing and also a little bit introduction about HL7 on how HL7 has been developed, how the name has been given and all. So for the hospital workflow, so to understand HL7, as I said, we have to understand the business requirement behind it, why HL7 has come up. So to jump to that, we first have to understand what a hospital workflow is. So in India or in US, so what is the first place that we go and visit to whenever we go to the hospital? Srinivas. Yeah. Hello. Srinivas, are you there? Srinivas, can you hear me? All right. So understanding hospital workflow is very, very important. So whenever we visit to any hospital, whenever any patient visits to any hospital, the first place that we interact with is with the receptionist. So when we visit the receptionist, if we are visiting them for the first time, the first question that they ask is whether we are visiting them for the first time or whether we have been to that specific place already. So if we say that we have been already to that hospital, then they would ask what is your reference number or what is your patient number uh, or something of that sort. But if you're visiting the hospital for the first time, the thing that they ask you to do is give your basic details like your name, address, your phone number, and if you have any insurances. So all of these information will be captured by the receptionist. So this basic information that we are talking about the name, your date of birth, your address, all of these details, which will represent your identity, are called as demographics as a whole in this workflow. So once your demographic details are collected, like your name, date of birth, gender, your SSN, or your address, insurance, and all, the next step would be uh, next step would be to ask the reason for your visit to the hospital. So immediately the next question from the receptionist will be which doctor you would like to meet and which specialty you would like to visit today. Then the patient would give say that I have this problem, I have some other problem, or they might say that I would like to meet specific doctor like an ENT doctor or any um, or any orthopedic doctor, something of that sort. So when they say that, now the receptionist will go ahead and schedule an appointment for that patient with that specific doctor, whoever is available as per the request of the patient. So to make the doctor know that he has an appointment schedule, there is a need for the information of the patient to pass across to the doctor, and doctor must know at what time the patient is going to come. Hence, there is a need of interface between the application of the receptionist and the provider to make the data flow. So this sentence says, now when the receptionist is going to schedule an appointment, uh, they schedule an appointment, but how will the doctor get to know that there is an appointment? So there is a bridge between the receptionist and the provider, which is called as an interface. We will discuss more about interface down the line in our upcoming sessions. But for now, just remember that an interface is a medium or a bridge between two different applications. So the application that is used by receptionist and the application that is used by the doctor. So they have their own specific names, which we'll look at after a while. But just for now, just remember that there is an application with a receptionist who is capturing all the data all, and saving it in their system. And there is another application which is at the doctor's desk, and they are saving the clinical related data information over there. So we'll get into in depth on what are these applications and when it is needed. But for now, just remember that they have their own applications which they use. So once the demographics is captured, once the appointment is scheduled, now the patient will pass on to the provider. So once the patient goes to the provider, now what are the questions? Provider is nothing but doctors are referred to as provider when we talk about the healthcare IT industry. So a provider is nothing but a doctor who provides that treatment to the patient. So when the patient arrives at the doctor's desk, now the first question the doctor would ask, uh, hey, what is the problem that you have? So what is the problem that you're facing? So they ask for the symptoms, and they say that in case if they are able to determine just by looking at the symptoms on what the problem is, then they say that then they just prescribe the medicine, and doctor will go ahead and uh, prescribe the medicine, and they would and the patient would leave the hospital. But in case if the doctor is unable to determine just by determine just by looking at the symptoms of the patient, then they would ask them to get some tests done. So now doctor will place an order, or doctor will place an order for a specific lab test to be done, and that order is sent to lab. Now when that order is sent to lab, now patient visits the lab, gets that test done, and will send that orders results back to the provider. Okay, and then and once the results are back, the provider will observe or go through the reports that provider is getting, and once he gets that, he will go ahead and diagnose the problem, and then prescribe the medicine accordingly. So once the provider is done with his work, he will let the receptionist know that this is the charge for a specific provider, for a specific patient, and that charge is collected at the receptionist desk. So this is a very high level overview of how a hospital works. And once the receptionist gets the information, receptionist will go ahead and go ahead and reach out the insurance companies to claim that amount and then get that amount. So this is the entire workflow in a nutshell. Okay, and so now let's review this again with the applications in place, and with the applications in place. So now let's go to the first slide again. So now the patient is visiting the receptionist. So in order for the receptionist to capture the data, they need an application, as I said before. So this application, which is at the receptionist desk, is called as Spm Application, which is nothing but practice management. As the name itself indicates, it is a application which is used to manage the entire practice. So basically, this would include capturing demographic information of any patient, or maintaining the libraries of who all the doctors are available in the hospital, and what are their availabilities, or on which date they are available, at what time they are available. And PM system also acts as a billing system, which is nothing but to capture the information of entire visit and generate the bills for the patients, or generate the claims for the patient. So this is the basic functionalities of a PM system. Now let's go to the application which is at the provider or the doctor's desk. The application which is at the doctor's desk is called as an EHR system. It is the full form of EHR is electronic health record. So this system will store entire patient information and the clinical information as well. So when I say clinical information, it includes what are the patient problems that he faced, what diagnosis has been made, what are the procedures that have been applied. So you might not be familiar with these terms. We'll go and look at these terms down the line when we discuss more in depth into HL7. But for now, just remember that in EHR, clinical related data is stored always. So when the data is captured at the receptionist desk, that data has to flow through the system electronically into the EHR system. And the reason behind that is, as you know, demographics is captured at the receptionist desk. Again, the patient visits the EHR system or the doctor's desk, and he wouldn't register himself again. That would be awkward. So to ensure that this information is already present in the other system, there will be need of an interface, which we are talking about here. This is the term which we will be using a lot because we are talking about interfaces. We will be talking more about HL7, and HL7 is all about interfaces or interfacing between two different applications. In our example, it is PM and EHR, but in the real-time world, we will come across many different types of interfaces. We will look at them later. So receptionist desk is a place which will host the PM system. So once the demographics is captured, that will flow through this interface, through this bridge to the application which is at the doctor's desk. And whenever an appointment is scheduled at the receptionist desk, even that will flow over to the doctor's desk. Now let's go to the third application in our workflow, which is nothing but an application which is used by the lab or the laboratory. So when a provider schedules an appointment, that particular lab test will flow through the interface electronically again to the system which is at the lab. So to the system which is at the lab. And once the lab is done with the results, they will send back the results to the provider or basically to the EHR system back electronically through an interface again. And this will be refiled, or this will be filed in the patient chart in the EHR system. And let's go back to let's go to the next slide. So in the next slide, we are talking more about charges. So if you review back, patient registration done, and patient has been scheduled with an appointment, they have been scheduled with an order, and now doctor has got back the results, doctor has diagnosed the patient that he has fever and all. And once that is done, now the time is to trigger the charges. So there are different types of charges that we can talk about. So let's consider that the receptionist is the endpoint to collect all the amount which for that particular visit of that patient. So there are different types of charges as we see here. So there is a charge from the provider for the diagnosis that has been made, which is nothing but so now the doctor is determining what problem the patient has. So doctor will collect some fees. That particular fees will go back to the receptionist. Now from the lab to the provider and then the receptionist. So now the lab says, lab people are going ahead and running some tests for that specific patient. So they will charge it. So this charge will pass on to the provider EHR system, and from EHR system, it will be sent back to the receptionist. And from the billing company, from the lab to the billing company. Now, when we discuss in depth about hospital workflow, we'll talk about billing company. For now, forget about this part. The charges will be sent back from lab to the receptionist directly at times. Or it depends on the workflow of the practice that they are choosing. So if the practice wants to have the charges of lab sent through the EHR system, then they will take this route number 2. Or if they want the charges directly to go back to receptionist, they can do that as well. So it depends on what kind of workflow that hospital wants to go with. So this is how the basic hospital workflow looks like. So to summarize this, demographics and appointments are unidirectional, which flow from PM to EHR. So as we discussed, PM is the system which is a practice management system which is at receptionist desk. EHR is an electronic health record. It is an application which is used by doctors. Now, demographics and appointments are unidirectional. So this is in general, demographics and appointments are unidirectional because demographics are registered at PM system and they flow to the HR system. It is never a case that I believe no one has seen a case where patient is registering himself at the doctor's desk, because we always visit the receptionist desk first, give our details, and then they schedule the appointment, post which we will meet the doctor. So that is how demographics and appointments are always unidirectional messages which flow from receptionist to doctor desk. And lab orders and results are bidirectional, which flow from EHR to third-party applications and vice versa. So from our example, we see that lab orders are flowing. So we call it as a bidirectional because there is a synchronous methodology for this, because we send an order and in response to that we receive a result back to the EHR system, which is to the doctor's desk, which is why we consider this as a bidirectional system. And charges will flow in many directions depending on the workflow that the practice is going to choose. As I said, charges can be sent through the EHR system, charges can be sent through the billing system, or charges can be sent directly to the receptionist. And charges can be sent directly to a billing company as well. So we'll talk about billing company later in detail because it will be a little bit confusing. So for now, just think about PM system, EHR system, and lab system, only 3 systems in place. So this is the overview, nutshell overview of how a hospital functions. So basically, I have just put everything on one slide without any description so that you can take a quick look at it. So this is to summarize how things work in a hospital workflow. Now, you might have a question. We are talking about HL7. Why did we go through hospital workflow? Is it essential? Yes, it is essential. The reason is, where did HL7 come from? Why did it come from? They want to use HL7 in this data flow, which is why it has been born. So it has been designed. So that is the reason why we went through this, and this will be our foundation. And whenever we are going to refer to HL7, we will need to come back here, discuss the workflow which is going on here in order to ensure that we are understanding HL7 correctly. So any questions so far?
No, Dixon.
Okay, great. So let's go to our next slide. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So now let's go through the introduction to HL7. So first, I would say, in case if we have, just give me 1 second, something is popping up.
This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so let's go through the introduction to HL7. Before before going into that, I would like to give an example. So say for example, we have 3 different people one man from Japan, and one man from India, and one man from USA or UK. So these three people talk three different languages. Now, Japanese guy doesn't know English, so he cannot communicate with the guy from US. At the same time, he doesn't even know Hindi to communicate with the person who is from India. Same applies to the other two people as well. So they say that other two people also cannot speak any language apart from their regional language. So in the necessity of communication between these three people, how do they communicate with each other? So that is when one single person comes into the picture who knows all of these three languages: English, Hindi, and Japanese, and that person will keep translating that information and starts communicating between these three people. So that is what that person who is acting as an orchestrator here between three different people, we can consider that person as HL7, who is basically having the common medium or common language which he is talking to each one of them. Okay, so we can say that HL7 is nothing but a language which is used between different systems to ensure that there is communication between different systems, even if they don't know the design and architecture. So basically, to explain it even more in an easiest way, say for example, we have PM application. The database architecture and the design of that application is totally different, right? And we have EHR system, and the design and database architecture of the EHR system is completely different again. So these two systems have to exchange the data, which is common data. Like now, when the patient is visiting the receptionist desk, they are collecting the demographic information, which includes name, date of birth, gender, SSN. Now, this information is stored in the PM system. So once this information is saved in the PM system, it has to flow electronically from the PM system to the HR system, and it has to get stored there. Now, in order to translate this data into the HR, in order to transfer this data into the HR system, as we discussed before, we will have an interface. We will have an interface in place, and that interface will immediately pick the data and will send it to EHR system. But the architecture of these two systems are different, and they don't understand each other, so that it could just go ahead and get saved in the same database table architecture as we have in PM system, which is why this data which is stored in the PM system will be converted to HL7, which could be understood by the EHR system on the other side. So that is how HL7 is designed to make it common. You will understand it more when we go deep down the line. So basically, to say, now let's relate that example to the discussion that we had just now. So say for example, we have hospital A and we have some small clinic and we have a lab information system. So now, as I said, from the front you are seeing this as an application, but at the back end, all of these three applications have their own different database architectures. But the data that they are storing is in common. Like when in hospital A and B, if there needs to be a communication, there is an application which is storing demographic information, and the same information has to be sent to clinic B, but the table or the database architecture which stores this information is totally different, and they cannot communicate with each other just like that, which is why HL7, a common language, has come into picture, which will go ahead and ensure that data can be converted from data picked up from hospital A is converted to HL7 and sent to clinic B. And this has been evolved as a standard. So basically, HL7 is nothing but a standard language which will help to communicate between all the three different systems, or 3 or 5 or 10 or whatever it is. So say for example, as I said in the before example, we have three different people who know three different languages. How would it be if three people knows one same language? They can communicate with each other without the need of someone else being involved. So if we have three people who know English with each other, say for example, all these three people do know their own language. Indian know Hindi and Japanese know Japanese and the UK guy knows English. Apart from that, Indian guy is also aware of English and he can speak English, and the Japanese guy also can speak English. So the common language here has become English, and they can communicate with each other even after knowing their own language. So you can consider that their own language, knowing their own language is their own database architecture, but understanding English as well is the common medium of communication between all three of them. So in the same way, if you look at in the hospital, healthcare, IT industry as well, even if the applications have their own different database architectures, they understand a common language which is called as HL7. And this HL7 language has standards that has been laid down by HL7 International Organization. So these standards will ensure that these standards are understood by each one of them, each party that is involved, or each system that is involved, or each organization that is involved, and everyone would follow that HL7 standards, and there wouldn't be need of understanding or knowing the other person's database architecture at all, and this would enable communication between two different systems if they understand just this particular standard. So why do we need standards is a question here. So these standards are designed to get to share these medical data. So when I say medical data, as we have discussed, so this is how I start relating back to the hospital workflow that we have discussed. So sharing of medical data is nothing but now your doctor is placing an order is going to the lab is a different system altogether, which is at some other location, and patient visits the lab, get the test done, and the result is sent, result reports are sent back to the doctor's system electronically. So in this way, so this is kind of sharing of medical data, and this is done in the form of HL7 itself. So this is one reason why do we need standards. And if we have standards, there is lot of accessibility to larger subset of data, like when we talk about charges, there is a lot of data included in the charges which can be accessed just by looking at the HL7 message. And another reason why do we have standards is claim payments will be very much easier. We did not talk about claim payments. We'll come to that later, because claims are done in a different standard altogether. Those are not done in the form of HL7. So we will look at them later. So interoperability. Interoperability is nothing but applications can talk to each other. Now we know that when a patient is being registered at the PM system, it is being flowing over to EHR, and doctor is able to see the patient details without getting registered or without doing anything in his application. So how is this happening? This is again happening through an interface or a bridge which is already there between PM and EHR, and the data is flowing from PM to EHR in the form of HL7. And there is greater safety for the patient because data is completely stored electronically, and there is no loss of data, or there is no scope of losing the patient history on what patient has gone through in the past or what medications he is allergic to and all. So there is a lot of quality in it, and basically, yeah, when we have standards, we definitely, I mean, most of the people will look up to that standards to ensure that there is some standard convention which is being followed when the data is being shared, which is approved by some accreditation. So we'll talk about accreditation a little later, once we start talking about HL7. So what is HL7? So HL7 is nothing but language, as I said, as I explained just before. So it is a language which is named as Health Level 7. We will see in the next slide why this name has been given, why Health Level 7 has been given. So it is a non-profit standard development organization. So they voluntarily, few people came up together and formed this, and they have started building the language. So it started back in 1987. Today we are at version 3, which was released in 2016. We will look at the history a little later in the next slide. So it will basically help to communicate or send real-time transactions between between two different applications in general. And these applications could be anything: PM and EHR, or PM and lab, or EHR and lab, or uh, or from PM to insurance company, or PM to billing system. So this kind of information is always transferred through HL7 in the form of HL7. So as I said, HL7 is nothing but uh, a lingua franca, which is nothing but its general language, which is used by healthcare computers to talk to other computers. The name comes from health care and the top level 7 of the operating system interconnect. We'll look at that in the next slide. Um, So almost more than 28 countries are using this. Name the big country. Like even in India we use it. US is the topmost country which is fully operational through HL7 interfaces. Uh, Most of the hospitals, I mean, I would say every hospital in US has HL7, are using HL7 to communicate between the applications that they are using internally within their hospital. Because after Obamacare, it has become essential and mandatory to use that, so that they can get some incentives and all. And that is a very bigger picture. I mean, that can be some sort of additional information if you want to get that information later. So more than 28 developed nations are using it. Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, India is also using it, to specifically name with AIMS in India, has HL7 interfaces very well developed, and continental hospitals in India are fully on EHR, and there are many other hospitals which are using it. Apollo Hospitals is one of them, which is using HL7 as a medium of communication between the applications that they are using and all. So next, why is the name HL7? So as I said, there is always a reason behind anything, and reason or requirement behind anything. So the reason behind the name HL7 is HL7 data translation happens at the application layer of OSI model. So if you're aware of OSI model, it has 7 layers, and the topmost layer is the application layer. So in this layer, the entire translation happens. So there is no any manipulation or translation of data in the lower layers. So which is why the name has been given as HL7, which is nothing but health level 7. So health indicates the healthcare, level indicates the number, level 7 indicates the number of the application layer within the operating system interconnect model. So as an overview, HL7, like any language, HL7 has its own grammar and syntax. As we have our grammar in English, in Hindi or Telugu or any other language, it has its own rules and regulations. Basically, that is what it meant to say. It has its own grammar and syntax. And version 2.3 is very famous. 2.7 is little latest, but version 2.3, 2.5 are most famous languages which are or most famous versions which are in practice in the current industry. Version 3 has also been released, but we'll talk about that when we look at the history. So version 2.3, 2.5 and 2.7. We'll discuss about the differences when we talk more about segments and fields of HL7 messages. And there are more than 50, there are a lot of data types. In fact, here I have specifically mentioned about version 2.3, but 2.7, 2.5 and 2.7 have more number of data fields and more number of data types added to it. So there are more than 80 message types in an HL7 message. And there are more than 86 event types when we talk about HL7 version 2.3. And what are the advantages of HL7? As we've seen before, it gives the ability to share medical data between demographics, billing data with HL7 enabled applications, and data transfer in the form of messages. So whenever we register a patient in the PM system, all the information that has been captured, like name, date of birth, gender, SSN, email address, phone number, insurances that are assigned or that patient holds, all of this information, as soon as this is stored into the database, that information will be picked up and that information will be translated into HL7 and will be sent across to EHR. And when EHR receives that HL7 message, it will decode that HL7 message and will store the data into their system. And that is how the patient, that is how the doctor will be able to see it. And this is a real-time transaction which will happen within seconds, within milliseconds, so that there is no delay in communicating to the doctor about the patient demographic details or appointment details or whatsoever it is. So there no special tools are required for creating messages, but when we say special tools, there are two conventions of creating HL7 messages. So when we talk about about the integration engine, we'll come to that. We can create HL7 message using external tools, as well as it is not always essential that you have to use external tools to create HL7 message. You can just use a SQL to do so. So this code is in ASCII format, which is nothing but human readable. You can just take a look at the message and understand. If you know the structure of the HL7 message, as I said, if you know the grammar of that HL7 message, then you will be able to read it. It's not a big deal. And as it works on application layer, it doesn't matter which OS it is working on. It will be able to communicate with all the operating systems, and it connects any system to any system, because basically, as I said, it is a common language, a common medium of language which is used between all different databases or all different systems, application systems. So they do get in touch, they do communicate with each other with the help of this language. So it can connect any system to any system. So HL7 assesses access to the overseas market. So this is something from business perspective. So HL7 is an organization. As I said, it's a non-profit organization, which will even enable if you want to communicate about the medical data with other countries or other organizations to form an HI. HI is nothing but a healthcare information exchange, which is nothing but a bigger organization which will interact with hundreds of hospitals in one location. So HI is a different concept altogether. So, but HL7 has given that ability to connect 100 different hospitals into at one place. So that is how it creates more and more market. So let's look at history of HL7. So if we look at history of HL7, version 2.3 has been released in 1997 and then 2.3.1 in 1999. When we talk about these releases, it's nothing but some new elements are added or some new segments or elements or fields or subfields are added to the previous version and they have been released as a new standard. So, but the base version, but the most used and base version, which is version 2.3, is most famous and will mostly include all the data that is usually being transacted between PM, EHR, applications, and all. So, version 2.5 has been released in 2003, and version 3 has been released in 2015. And but version 3 is completely different from what we see in 2.5, 2.4. I mean, from the earlier versions. Earlier versions had their own grammar, which we'll look at in a while. But version 3 is completely different, which looks like XML. It looks like XML, but it's not XML actually. But it has their own standards, which is why version 3 is not widely accepted in the market. Even I don't see any one of them using 3 as their version of uh, version to communicate with other systems, because 3 is very heavy and 3 is very it is very hard to implement because of the syntaxes and all. So still version 2.5, 2.7 is still in the market and that is being widely used. So we will be looking at version 2.5 or 2.7 itself. And FHIR, which is latest methodology of transmitting data, or I would say latest languages. FHIR is nothing but fast health interoperability resources. So this standard has been developed in two languages, which is two forms. One is XML and one is JSON. So this is completely different from HL7. So we will not touch that. But just for your information, if you want to understand or if you want to get a bit ahead, you can ask the questions once we complete HL7 sessions and all. You can go through FHIR standards on hl7.org website. You will get to know more about that. So next, an overview of HL7. As I said, it has more than 50 data types, more than 80 message types. I think this is beating all right. So how HL7 message works. So before we look at that, I think we will stop the session here. So as we have gone through two